I am Hercule Poirot. Welcome to my new mystery story.
It was one of those autumn evenings when the fog rolls in early across the Thames, softening the outlines of London into muted silhouettes. Inside the richly panelled drawing room of Lady Helena Marbury's townhouse in Mayfair, however, the atmosphere was anything but softened. The hostess, elegant and imperious in her pearls, had gathered a curious mixture of guests for her dinner party. Financiers, a retired colonel, a stage actress, and even a minor royal who lent the affair an air of consequence. But the evening never reached its conclusion. For just as the clock in the hall chimed 9, a footman discovered Lady Helena slumped at her escritoire. Her head rested awkwardly against her jeweled fingers, the fine stationery beneath her cheek marred by a pool of ink that spread outward like a dark stain of finality. An overturned glass of champagne lay at her elbow, and in her other hand, still clutched with desperate rigidity, was a telegram slip, the message half written, never dispatched. Gasps echoed as the assembled guests crowded at the doorway. Some whispered of apoplexy, others of a heart attack. But it was Lord Penrith, tall and hawk-faced, who muttered the word that hung in the air like a knife. Murder. The unsent telegram bore only a few words, smudged by ink and Lady Helena's failing grasp. It read, "Cannot wait. The secret must—" The remaining letters dissolved into an illegible blur. Within minutes, the grand house became a prison of silk and shadows. No guest was permitted to leave. The local constable was summoned, the coroner notified. Yet even as officials bustled about with grave importance, an unease spread among the company. Lady Helena had been a woman of influence and wealth, known for her sharp tongue and her even sharper knowledge of other people's secrets. Each face in that room, whether painted with shock, grief, or indignation, seemed to conceal something beneath the surface. And as the fog pressed against the windows and the unfinished telegram remained upon the desk, it was clear that the answer to Lady Helena's death lay not in poison bottles or fingerprints, but in the hidden motives of those who dined with her that night. The drawing room held its breath while the household adjusted to the new order. Doors were shut, voices sank, and the servants moved with that discreet quiet which in English houses accompanies catastrophe. The constable, red-eared and solemn, arrived to collect names and forbid departures. Lady Helena remained at her escritoire, the pen fallen at a slant, the unsent telegram like a thought arrested in mid-air. The guests settled into clusters that betrayed alliances. Lord Penrith, lean and severe, stood by the hearth as though the marble and the flames belonged to him. Inez Vale, the actress, held her stole close and tried on composure the way she tried on jewels. Colonel Arbuthnot, mustaches bristling, paced a small, angry circuit. Felix Darnley, society columnist, lounged with the indolence of a cat near cream. Prince Otto von Hollenbeck watched the room as if it were an opera that needed his applause. Miss Lydia Marsh, Lady Helena's companion, became economy itself, quiet, brisk, observant. Her ladyship was perfectly well at 8, announced Jarvis the butler, with that evenness which had soothed family tempests. She took broth at past. Mr. Kestrel called to present a paper. Afterwards, the company assembled. All eyes went to Mr. Adrian Kestrel, whose spectacles already glimmered with anxiety. "A prospectus," he said, dabbing his brow. "A courtesy." Lady Helena asked, quite directly, about a consolidation affecting certain holdings. "Marbury consolidated?" Penrith said without looking at him. "She had a controlling interest." Kestrel's denial sounded like a confession. "Only an inquiry." Darnley's voice drifted like cigarette smoke. "Inquiry or no, it lends the telegram a flavor. The secret must—" The word after must will be the hinge. Mrs. Vale turned sharply. "You are indecent, Mr. Darnley." "Indecent," murmured the prince, "or merely punctual. Death reduces delay." The constable, supplied with routine more than science, asked for movements. The night unrolled backward. At 8:40, people drifting to conservatory and library. At 8:50, a chime upstairs. At 9, the footman James, discovering the collapse and crying out. No one had left the house. No one, by general recollection, had seen anything unusual until it became undeniable. Unusual things now showed themselves. On the blotter, faintly impressed beneath the smudged slip, ran a second line, not inked but pressed, a ghost of words. The constable missed it. Miss Marsh did not. She bent close without touching and grew very still. On a side table, a champagne glass lay tilted. Dr. Rowan, summoned from Brook Street, lifted it, sniffed, and set it down. No verdict until morning, he said, which was his way of admitting the possibility of poison without dignifying it. A little parade of motives went by, each wrapped in good manners. Colonel Arbuthnot had lately sought Lady Helena's support for a memorial fund. She had threatened to withdraw if it became a spectacle. Vale had thanked Lady Helena for an introduction that did not, in the end, secure the part. Prince Otto had been the subject of a letter from Lady Helena to an embassy. Candid advice phrased so generously it stung. Kestrel's firm needed her name upon a scheme whose virtue was confidence. Who was to receive the telegram? Darnley asked, too gently. It was not addressed, Miss Marsh said. Her ladyship drafted first. But cannot wait suggests an appointment, Penrith observed. Or a fear, the prince said. Mrs. Albright, Lady Helena's widowed sister, arrived in shawls and indignation, declaring that Providence never struck without accomplices. Jarvis took her hand as if it were a fragile relic and seated her away from the desk. James, the footman, stared at the floorboards near the escritoire with the guilt of youth that has nothing to hide. Dr. Rowan asked for bottles. Champagne, yes. A cordial, uncorked. In a drawer, a small phial of digitalis where it did not belong. For her heart, Miss Marsh said quickly. Prescribed last winter. The doctor, Dr. Rowan replied mildly, did not prescribe keeping it among stationery. He did not accuse. He arranged facts like chessmen and waited for them to threaten. Kestrel, attempting helpfulness, produced only perspiration. Had she meant to send that telegram, she would have rung. The bell pull is within reach. Yet she did not. Therefore, someone intended she should not, Darnley supplied. The constable silenced him with a look borrowed from sergeants. The room offered new features as if ashamed of having concealed them. Near the door stood a black travelling case, glossily anonymous. In the coal scuttle lay a torn scrap from an envelope. A faint perfume hovered that belonged to none of the ladies. That case is mine, said the prince without being asked. It was brought by mistake from my hotel. Shirts, I assure you. Locked because hotels encourage optimism. Shirts do not clink, the colonel said. I heard metal when the footman set it down. Penrith stepped to the escritoire and stood very still. Lydia, he said softly, using Lady Helena's girlhood name. What did you fear? Miss Marsh's answer was precise. Improvisation. Patience rewarded her. She tilted the lamp and the ghost line darkened enough for sense. Not the whole sentence, a fragment only. Must be told in person. The 4 words, spoken by Miss Marsh in her even voice, altered the temperature of the room. To whom? Penrith asked. The fog pressed its forehead to the glass. The constable, having locked the doors to satisfy the law, turned towards the hall as a motor halted outside, not a rattletrap, but something urbane and certain. Jarvis went to attend. The company, which had been a map of quiet hostilities and dependencies, rearranged itself at once, as furniture does when a new owner is announced. Whatever story had begun with a telegram unfinished was about to be continued by someone whose habit was completion. The murmur of voices subsided the instant the front door opened. The sound of a cane upon marble echoed into the hall, deliberate, unhurried, yet commanding in its very rhythm. When Hercule Poirot entered, the atmosphere in Lady Helena's drawing-room shifted as if a hidden hand had adjusted the weights and balances of the night. His figure, immaculate in a dark suit that resisted every crease, seemed to impose a discipline upon the room. The waxed mustache gleamed like a signature upon a document. The eyes, bright and calculating, missed nothing. He removed his gloves with care and bowed slightly to the constable, then to Lady Helena's sister, before stepping nearer to the escritoire. His voice, when it came, was smooth, precise, and carried with it a finality that brooked no disorder. No one shall be excused, messieurs et mesdames. The truth, it lies already in this room. The constable, relieved of authority he scarcely knew how to wield, yielded to him without protest. Poirot did not touch the body. He regarded it as one would regard a chess piece that had already fallen. Instead, his gaze rested upon the telegram, the smudges, the overturned glass, the faint impression of a second line. His head inclined. She was writing, she was interrupted, she was struck. None. Not struck by a hand, perhaps, but by fear, by poison, by the cunning of another. Voila, the tableau is complete. He turned, surveying the assembly. You are all here, and so we begin. Lord Penrith attempted dignity, but his voice betrayed impatience. This is hardly Scotland Yard's doing. Who summoned you, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot permitted himself a modest smile. An old acquaintance, the Chief Inspector Japp, who suspected that a certain elegance of crime might profit from my presence. He telephoned as soon as word reached him of Lady Helena's collapse. And he tapped his breast pocket. I was, by chance, already in Mayfair. He stepped towards the group and allowed the silence to settle, as though each person must first confront the weight of his scrutiny. We begin with the little details, yes? The glass overturned, the ink smudge, the message half composed. Nothing is too small for the eyes of Hercule Poirot. But more than these, we must observe the psychology. Who profits from the death of Lady Helena Marbury? Who feared the telegram she wished to send? Colonel Arbuthnot blustered. You speak as though we're all conspirators. The poor lady might have had a seizure. Poirot raised a finger. But then why the telegram? Why the words, cannot wait? A heart seizes, yes, but it does not dictate a message that trails into despair. Non, Colonel, there is purpose here, and in purpose we find our murderer. He moved first to Inez Vale. The actress lowered her eyes, but not before a flicker of unease crossed her painted features. Mademoiselle Vale, you were near the conservatory when the hour approached. What occupied your attention? She swallowed, then spoke with an effort at nonchalance. I was in conversation with Mr. Darnley. He was telling me of a play that will lampoon our politics. I had no notion of Lady Helena's distress. Darnley confirmed it with a nod, but Poirot did not look at him. You are accustomed, mademoiselle, to performance. Remember this, your face says more than your tongue. She coloured, but said nothing further. He turned then to Adrian Kestrel, who shifted as if the spectacles pinched his nose. Monsieur Kestrel, you brought a prospectus. A venture most pressing, nests pas? One that required Lady Helena's signature. Kestrel mopped his brow. It was business, mere business. She asked me to prepare figures. Poirot's voice hardened slightly. And if she refused, would your business endure or collapse? Kestrel stammered, unable to form the neat denial that would have suited him. Poirot allowed the discomfort to deepen before moving on. He fixed his attention upon the prince, whose case still rested near the door. Your Highness, you travel light. Shirts only, you say. Yet shirts do not clink when moved. It is curious. The prince smiled with languid grace. Curious only to those who do not recognize that I carry a fencing foil. A man of my birth is seldom without his exercise. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Exercise is admirable. Murder, less so. Lydia Marsh, the companion, stood stiff as a sentinel. Poirot inclined his head towards her. "Mademoiselle, you are precise, discreet, devoted. You saw the ghost line upon the blotter before any other. That is significant. You knew Lady Helena well. What secret must be told in person?" Miss Marsh answered with composure, but there was a tremor under it. She did not confide in me. She kept her counsel closely, even from those who served her loyally. Poirot accepted the answer without nodding, but his gaze lingered, reading the posture, the tight hands, the silence that contained more than speech. The room, once restless with speculation, grew still. Each suspect had felt the touch of Poirot's inquiry, brief yet penetrating, like a scalpel drawing a line. He had not accused, not yet, but suspicion now hung upon every soul. The constable shifted his feet uneasily, and even Dr. Rowan, seated by the champagne glass, kept his eyes fixed upon Poirot. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and paced the carpet, his steps small, exact, as though measuring the floorboards themselves. "Consider, mes amis, a woman poised to reveal a secret, a message never sent, a gathering of those who each had reason to prevent disclosure. One among you, perhaps more, feared the arrival of truth. Lady Helena sought to tell it in person. To whom? That is the question we must answer." He paused, then added softly, "And until I know, I shall not allow the murderer to sleep." Outside, the fog pressed closer against the panes, muffling the sounds of the city. Within, the fire hissed, the body remained still, and Poirot's presence, neat and unyielding, filled the space with an order that no one dared disturb. The investigation had begun, and already the walls themselves seemed to tighten, trapping every secret, every lie, until he chose the moment to set them free. The silence that followed Poirot's pronouncement was heavy, broken only by the faint hiss of the fire and the shuffle of the constable's boots on the rug. Poirot did not allow it to linger too long. Silence, though useful, must be managed like any other instrument. He moved, a fraction, closer to Lady Helena's escritoire, and bent forward, careful not to disturb a single object, merely allowing his eyes to roam. When he spoke again, his voice was calm, yet every syllable seemed to tighten the air. "We shall proceed with order. Each of you will recount your movements with exactitude from the hour of dinner until the moment the alarm was raised. It is only through the little details, the moments that appear so trivial, that we shall find the dissonance." Lord Penrith bristled, but obeyed. He had remained by the fireplace, conversing first with Colonel Arbuthnot, later drifting towards Miss Vale when the colonel grew restless. "I heard nothing unusual," he concluded. "Until the cry from the footman, there was nothing to suggest calamity." Poirot inclined his head. "And yet you noticed the clock chime?" Penrith admitted it with a curt nod, his eyes narrowing. Poirot did not press further, but the observation was stored. Colonel Arbuthnot, when called upon, responded with military precision. He had walked twice around the conservatory, inspecting orchids that seemed to thrive despite the autumn. He had then rejoined the others near the sideboard. "I drink whiskey, not champagne," he declared with a finality meant to exonerate him from association with the overturned glass. Poirot let him stand in that conviction, merely observing, "You are a man who likes facts to march in line. Yet facts, Colonel, are fond of rebellion." The colonel frowned, but said no more. Inez Vale, asked to account for herself, lifted her chin. "As I said, I spoke with Mr. Darnley. We were near the pianoforte. He was mocking a politician's speech, and I was laughing." Poirot's eyebrow lifted. "Laughing, mademoiselle, when the household descended into such silence that a clock could be heard above conversation. An interesting choice." She flushed, then retorted, "Actors are trained to laugh when nothing is funny." Poirot smiled faintly. "Just so. But tonight, mademoiselle, it is not a role you play." Mr. Darnley affected unconcern. "It is true. We exchanged witticisms. I saw Lady Helena enter the writing desk earlier, but I assumed it was a note to her solicitor. She often dashed off letters. Poirot stepped nearer, his eyes sharp. You assumed much, but you did not look at the slip when she fell. Darnley shrugged. The ink was blurred. I cannot read smudges. Poirot murmured softly. Some men cannot read words even when they are clear. Darnley's lips twitched in irritation, but he allowed silence to shield him. The prince's turn drew every gaze. He leaned against the back of a chair, exuding poise. I was admiring a portrait. An ancestor of Lady Helena's. A stern face. One might almost say it was warning her. When the alarm came, I hurried forward as any gentleman would. Poirot's tone was silk over steel. And your case, Monseigneur? It was brought here tonight, and yet you claim it. Does not belong. Shirts and foils, yes? But you carried it not into the chamber where you sleep, but here, into the drawing-room, a curious resting place. The prince offered a languid shrug. I did not carry it. A servant erred. Poirot nodded slowly. So often, it is the servants who err, never the masters. But even so, shirts and foils make a poor music together. Adrian Kestrel's voice quavered as he recited his part. He had presented his papers, left them in Lady Helena's study, then joined the company once more. He had been near the library door when the cry was heard. Poirot fixed him with a penetrating stare. And the figures in your papers, Monsieur, were they honest? Or did you fear that Lady Helena intended to reveal otherwise? Kestrel flushed crimson and stammered a denial, but it carried little weight. Poirot let the silence that followed serve as judgment. Lastly, Lydia Marsh was asked. Her voice was quiet, her diction exact. I was assisting Lady Helena with correspondence earlier in the evening. After dinner, I withdrew to fetch her shawl. When I returned, she was at the desk, writing. I did not intrude. Poirot's head inclined. And you saw the words she penned? She shook her head. Only that she wrote quickly, urgently. Then the ink spilled. Then James cried out. Poirot studied her as though she were a cipher. You are loyal, mademoiselle, but loyalty can be a mask for fear. She met his eyes without flinching, though her hands were tightly clasped. When all had spoken, Poirot stepped back, addressing them as a group. You see, messieurs et mesdames, the tale you weave is simple. Each was elsewhere, each occupied, each innocent. Yet still Lady Helena lies dead with the telegram unfinished. If each of you tells the truth, then truth itself must be deceptive. Therefore, one at least has embroidered his or her tale with false threads. The constable shuffled uneasily. Dr. Rowan, who had been quietly examining the file of digitalis, cleared his throat. The dose, if taken, would be fatal. But whether she ingested it tonight cannot yet be said. Poirot inclined his head. Precisely, Doctor, and therein lies the difficulty. The physical evidence is ambiguous. But psychology, that betrays more. He moved again to the escritoire, noting the blotter, the ink. His finger traced the ghost line. Must be told in person. Who was to be told? Of what secret? And why must it not be written? His gaze swept the company. These questions will not be answered by science, but by the small inconsistencies in your accounts. Already I perceive them. The group stirred, a ripple of discomfort passing through. Poirot allowed them no release. Tonight, none shall leave. You will be patient, you will endure my questions, for it is only thus that order shall be restored. Lady Helena wished to reveal a truth. She has been silenced. But Hercule Poirot, he will not be silenced. And I assure you, messieurs et mesdames, the murderer is among us still, listening to my words. The fire snapped. A draught pressed the curtains inward. Beyond the window, the fog swallowed the lamps of Mayfair. Inside, the circle closed tighter, every eye measuring the others, every heart guarded. Poirot, satisfied that the tension had settled exactly as he required, folded his hands, and declared softly, "Now we begin to separate the lies from the truth." Poirot's words hung in the air like a bell that had been struck and left to vibrate through the silence. No one dared move at first, but the tension soon became unbearable. Colonel Arbuthnot cleared his throat with a sound meant to show irritation, though it betrayed unease. The prince brushed an invisible speck from his cuff. Lydia Marsh fixed her eyes on the escritoire, as if to avoid the gaze of anyone else. Poirot himself seemed content to let the discomfort stretch until it formed cracks in their composure. At last he spoke, his voice soft, deliberate, yet carrying across the room with authority. "The telegram tells us that there was a secret, a thing so urgent that it must be told at once. And yet it was not written down. Pourquoi? Because Lady Helena feared interception. That is what we must ask ourselves. Who here would have been endangered by her words?" His eyes moved from face to face, and though no one spoke, the pressure increased. Poirot walked toward the sideboard where decanters gleamed. His hand did not touch them. Instead, he looked down at the rim of a glass, faintly marked with lipstick. "One among you took champagne. One among you may have exchanged glasses, n'est-ce pas? It is in such little moments that the act of murder is accomplished. But to know which hand performed the substitution, I must first know who stood nearest." He turned to Inez Vale. "Mademoiselle, you took champagne." "I did," she admitted quickly, as though speed would lend honesty. "But so did Lady Helena, and half the room besides. I cannot account for every glass." Poirot inclined his head. "You are right, and yet one glass lies overturned. The question is, was it hers, or was it placed there by another?" The constable shifted uncomfortably, clearly out of his depth, but Poirot's calm precision seemed to envelop him as well, demanding patience. Poirot turned back to the group. "We must consider motive, mes amis. Who feared Lady Helena's pen? Let us look more closely at Monsieur Kestrel. You bring papers of finance, yes? Figures that depend on her support. If she withdrew, what then?" Kestrel's voice cracked. "She intended to withdraw. She told me as much. But she would not have written a telegram about it. Why would she? It was not a secret, it was business." Poirot stepped nearer. "Ah, but there is the error, monsieur. Business is never secret to the businessman, but to others, to others it may be deadly." Lord Penrith intervened brusquely. "This line of questioning is absurd. Helena's dealings with Kestrel were hardly sufficient to warrant." He stopped suddenly, aware that his vehemence had drawn attention. Poirot's gaze shifted to him at once, catching the tremor before it could vanish. "Ah, milord," he said softly, "you defend quickly, as though it were yourself who required defending. Tell me, what is it you feared Lady Helena might reveal?" Penrith's face darkened. "Fear? I fear nothing. Helena was family. Whatever her words, they would not have touched me." Poirot let the denial pass, but the weight of his glance suggested otherwise. He turned instead to Lydia Marsh, who had remained silent all this while. "Mademoiselle, you are the only one who saw her begin the telegram. You say she wrote quickly, urgently. But you did not glance at the words, not even one?" "I saw her hand move," she replied firmly, though her fingers were twisting against each other. "I saw the pen blot. That was all." Poirot's voice was gentle, yet pressing. "You are loyal, yes. But loyalty sometimes demands silence where truth would speak, and yet silence can betray, too. Consider this, mademoiselle. If the words were meant for you, would you admit it?" Her composure wavered for the first time, but she said nothing. Poirot allowed the moment to settle before turning to the prince. "And you, monseigneur, with your case? A foil, you say? Ah, but you would carry such a thing for practice, not for performance. And yet the weight of it, too heavy for mere sport. What do you conceal in that case?" The prince laughed softly, but the sound lacked its earlier ease. "You may open it if you wish. There is nothing within that would interest you." "On the contrary," Poirot murmured, "everything within interests me." But later, later. For now, let us return to the glass. To the telegram, to the words, must be told in person. Whom was she to meet? That, I think, is the heart of the matter. Dr. Rowan, who had been quiet, spoke up. If I may, the presence of digitalis cannot be ignored. Whether prescribed or not, if taken tonight, it would act swiftly. The symptoms fit. Just so, Poirot agreed. But the question is not only how, it is why, and by whose design. A woman such as Lady Helena did not keep poison near her papers by accident. Either she prepared to use it, or another wished it close at hand. The fire crackled suddenly, startling them all. Poirot turned back to the group, his voice tightening with quiet authority. Already I see paths diverging. One leads to money, one to reputation, one to matters of the heart, and all meet at the point of the telegram. That is no coincidence. Tonight, Lady Helena was poised to speak words that would alter the balance among you. She did not live to utter them. And so it is among you, messieurs et mesdames, that we shall find the hand which stopped her pen. He paused, letting the weight of his certainty press down. Outside, a carriage rattled past, the sound dulled by fog. Inside, the drawing-room had become a crucible where silence, fear, and suspicion melted together. Poirot smoothed his mustache with delicate fingers and concluded in a voice that seemed to promise inevitability. You may deceive yourselves. You may even deceive the constable, but Hercule Poirot, you will not deceive him. Before this night is ended, I shall know whose secret demanded her death. The flames in the hearth shifted with a sharp crack, and every head turned involuntarily toward the sound, as though expecting revelation to emerge from fire rather than from the lips of a detective. Poirot stood perfectly still, allowing the distraction to pass, his eyes half closed in thought. Then, with a small clearing of his throat, he drew them back with the simple act of straightening his cuffs. We must proceed to precision. Vague stories. They are like fog. They conceal but do not protect. Let us, therefore, reconstruct the moments before Lady Helena fell. His gaze landed upon the footman James, who had lingered near the doorway, pale and anxious. Come closer, mon garçon. Tell us exactly what you saw when you entered the room. James obeyed, stumbling a little in his eagerness to be useful. I'd been ordered to bring more champagne, sir. I came through the side door and I saw her ladyship at the desk. She was writing, quickly, and then she gave a sort of gasp. Her head dropped, the pen slipped, the ink went everywhere. I dropped the tray and shouted. That's the truth. Poirot tilted his head. And who was nearest to her at that moment? The boy hesitated, looking helplessly at the assembled guests. I do not rightly know. Everyone was moving about. Mr. Darnley was by the piano, Colonel Arbuthnot near the conservatory doors. I think Miss Vale was speaking to him, but I can't swear to it. Lord Penrith was at the fire. The Prince had just come from the hall. Miss Marsh. She was just entering, I think. Mr. Kestrel was somewhere near the library, I believe. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Exactement. Each one placed, like the pieces on the chessboard, and yet one piece moved silently, quickly, and none but Lady Helena saw it. She tried to write the truth, but the hand of another intervened. James, you say you dropped the tray. What became of it? The boy looked miserable. It fell near the hearth. Jarvis, the butler, carried it out straight away. Poirot made a mental note. We shall see it again. Even broken glass, even spilled champagne, they can whisper. He dismissed James gently, and the boy backed away with visible relief. The company shifted restlessly, like passengers on a vessel heading into uncertain waters. Poirot advanced a step, his eyes narrowing. Let us examine this matter of the telegram. It says, cannot wait. The secret must, and then again, must be told in person. Does this not suggest urgency? Desperation, perhaps? Lady Helena did not fear for herself alone. She feared for another. Who then among you had reason to dread her speaking? Lord Penrith bristled once more. You repeat yourself, Monsieur Poirot. Must we endure these insinuations again and again? Poirot gave a faint smile. When a man is most impatient, it is often then he fears the truth will catch him. The colonel grunted approvingly, though he quickly looked away when Poirot's gaze turned toward him. You, Colonel, claim to have admired orchids, but the gardener, he tells me earlier that the conservatory was locked at dusk, as it always is. How then did you wander there? Arbuthnot reddened. I may have been mistaken. I stood at the window. The orchids were visible, I swear it. Poirot's voice was silken. Visible, yes, but locked. And so your circuit was not among flowers, but among lies. Why, Colonel, did you alter your place? The colonel's moustaches bristled, his denial loud but unconvincing. Poirot let it pass, for now, and moved instead to Inez Vale. Mademoiselle, you claim to have laughed with Mr. Darnley, but Lady Helena's ear was sharp, her temper quick. Would she not have rebuked you if she heard your laughter while she wrote in haste? Did she rebuke you? The actress faltered. She looked up once, but she said nothing. Poirot's eyes shone. She looked up, she saw, and she said nothing. Why? Because she was afraid, not of you perhaps, but of one who stood behind you. Think, mademoiselle, who was near you then? She struggled to answer, then whispered, The prince. He passed behind me at that moment. A stir ran through the room. The prince smiled thinly, but it was no longer the smile of one in command. Do not make shadows out of footsteps, Monsieur Poirot. I passed, yes. I admired the portrait, as I have said. That is no crime. Poirot's reply was calm. No, but the timing. It is interesting. Lady Helena begins her telegram. She looks up, she sees, she falters. Then the ink spreads. Within minutes, she is gone. It is not the footsteps alone, Monseigneur. It is their coincidence with her last act. Kestrel, desperate to divert attention, blurted, She might have poisoned herself. Out of despair, out of spite. These great ladies, they act on impulse. Poirot's moustache twitched. You reveal, monsieur, more about your imagination than about Lady Helena. She was a woman of control. Even in her death, she tried to send a message. No, suicide is not in question. It was murder. The words settled with finality. Dr. Rowan shifted, preparing to speak, but Poirot raised a hand. One moment more, Doctor. There is something else. When Jarvis removed the tray, did he notice the glass that lay nearest to Lady Helena? Was it hers, or had another drunk from it and placed it there? No answer came, for Jarvis himself was absent. Poirot drew in a slow breath. We shall see. But mark this, mes amis. The truth is already here. The poison, it is not merely in the glass or in the vial. It is in the lies we have heard, and those lies, they will betray the liar before this night is ended. The fog pressed tighter against the windows, muffling the sounds of the city until only the ticking of the clock remained. Poirot turned slightly, his eyes gleaming as he prepared to strike at the next falsehood. The room, once grand and comfortable, had become a stage for fear, and every actor upon it felt the invisible hand of direction guiding them toward the moment when concealment would be no longer possible. The drawing-room had grown oppressive, the fog beyond the windows a thick, impenetrable wall, as though the house had been sealed from the world. Poirot stood unmoving, the stillness of a man whose thoughts moved too quickly for his body to follow. Then, with sudden precision, he turned toward the butler who had just returned from the hall carrying the silver tray James had dropped. Jarvis placed it upon a side table, the glass fragments carefully gathered. Poirot examined them with interest, leaning close but never touching. Ah, you see, mes amis, even broken glass retains its story. This one here, a lip mark distinct, and yet not the color of Lady Helena's lipstick. A detail small, but it speaks. Someone drank from her glass, or placed their own to masquerade as hers. His eyes swept the room. Who among you wears such a shade? Inez Vale stirred. Her lips painted a deeper crimson than Lady Helena's preferred rose. She spoke quickly, too quickly. It could have been anyone. Glasses are passed about in confusion. You cannot prove it was mine. Poirot raised a finger. No, not yet. But we do not require proof in this instant. We require order, and order, mademoiselle, tells me that you held a glass with this color, and that glass has found its way to the desk of Lady Helena. The actress paled, then attempted bravado. Perhaps I set it down near her. Yes, but that is no crime. No, no crime, Poirot said softly, unless what it contained was altered. The colonel muttered, all this talk of glasses. A lady is dead, man, and you circle about trifles. Poirot's gaze sharpened. The trifles, Colonel, they are the hinges on which great doors turn. You claim to have admired orchids in a locked conservatory. That is a trifle also, and yet it is the sort of trifle that leads to gallows. Arbuthnot flushed, but before he could protest further, Poirot turned to Jarvis. Tell me, mon ami, when you cleared the tray, did you note the position of the glasses? The butler's voice was measured, respectful. Her ladyship's glass was nearest the escritoire. Another, the one with the darker lipstick, was beside it. The rest were scattered. I removed them all at once to prevent staining of the rug. Poirot nodded gravely. Exactement. The glass of Lady Helena was not alone. 2 glasses, side by side, hers and another's. And she, writing with urgency, does not notice when one is changed. A subtle hand, a quiet moment, and the deed is done. A ripple of unease passed through the company. The prince lifted his chin. This is speculation, monsieur. Nothing more. Poirot's moustache twitched upward. Speculation, perhaps, but speculation informed by observation, which is the beginning of truth. He let the words sink, then shifted his gaze deliberately toward Adrian Kestrel. You have been very quiet since. Is it not strange? A financier, usually full of numbers, and yet tonight you give me none. Tell me, monsieur, did Lady Helena intend to reveal something in her telegram that touched you directly? Kestrel stammered, his spectacles glinting in the firelight. I know nothing of her telegram. My dealings were above board. She had promised to consider my proposal, nothing more. Consider? Poirot repeated. But you told us earlier she intended to withdraw, which is true, monsieur, that she promised to consider or that she intended to refuse. You cannot have both. The financier's face crumpled. She hinted at refusal. But it was not final. I swear it. Poirot allowed himself a satisfied murmur. Just so. And yet the contradiction, it betrays you. She hinted at refusal, you feared it, and she prepared to tell someone of your practices, not with pen, but in person. That is why she was silenced. Kestrel protested weakly, but the weight of suspicion had already shifted. Lord Penrith broke in impatiently. This is absurd. You chase shadows, Poirot. Helena's affairs were complicated, yes, but hardly so dire as to justify murder. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet, milord, your own affairs are delicate, are they not? You speak always to divert attention from yourself. Lady Helena knew much, too much perhaps, even about you. Penrith stiffened, but said nothing. The silence that followed was telling. Poirot straightened, addressing them all once more. Listen well. Lady Helena's final words, must be told in person, indicate that she intended to meet someone here, tonight or tomorrow, to reveal the truth. One among you feared that meeting. One among you could not allow her to speak. The poison, the glass, the substitution, these are but the tools. The motive lies in the telegram's unfinished thought. The clock upon the mantel struck the half-hour, the chimes clear against the muffled silence outside. Poirot's voice grew softer, more dangerous in its quiet. Already I see where the path leads. Each of you has given me fragments, inconsistencies, contradictions. Soon I shall arrange them in order, as one arranges the pieces of a puzzle. And when they fall into place, there will be no doubt. Dr. Rowan cleared his throat, uneasy. Monsieur Poirot, you speak as though the case is solved already. Poirot inclined his head. Not solved, Docteur. Not yet, but the pattern is clear. It remains only to test it, to probe once more, to observe how each of you responds when pressed, and then, when the moment is right, the truth shall emerge in all its clarity. The fire hissed as a log collapsed inward, sparks leaping like sudden revelations. Poirot's shadow stretched long across the rug, falling across the faces of the assembled guests. None met his gaze. Each one looked elsewhere, at the flames, at the rug, at the smudged telegram still lying upon the blotter. And in that silence, thick as the fog outside, it became clear that no one in that room would escape the scrutiny of Hercule Poirot before the night was done. The air in the drawing-room seemed to tighten with every tick of the mantel clock, as though the very walls leaned inward to listen. Poirot had spoken with the calm assurance of a man who already saw the end of the path, yet he lingered deliberately, allowing the weight of suspense to bear down on his audience. He clasped his hands neatly before him, tilting his head a fraction. We must move from the general to the particular. It is not enough to say Lady Helena wished to reveal a secret. We must know to whom and why. His eyes, bright and unyielding, fixed suddenly upon Lydia Marsh. She straightened at once, her composure brittle but intact. I've told you all I know. I fetched her shawl. When I returned, she was already writing. Pardon, Poirot murmured gently, but that is not all. You are her companion, her confidant. You saw her moods, you knew her intentions. You would know, perhaps, the person she most wished to confront. Miss Marsh's hands, folded tightly in her lap, betrayed a faint tremor. She spoke of business, of course, of Mr. Kestrel's scheme. She was unsettled by it, but beyond that, I cannot say. Poirot moved closer, his small figure radiating unexpected authority. Unsettled, yes, but not fearful. And yet her urgency, her choice to write a message she dared not send. This suggests fear. Did she, mademoiselle, confide her fear to you? There was a pause. When Miss Marsh finally answered, her voice was quiet, almost inaudible. She said only that truth must be spoken face to face, never trusted to paper, and she told me that when she had spoken, someone's mask would break. A ripple of unease swept through the guests. Poirot inclined his head with satisfaction. Just so. The mask, mes amis. Already I see the fissures. Lady Helena was too clever to keep silent forever. She prepared to strike, and so she was struck first. Kestrel protested, his voice sharp with desperation. You twist everything to suit your theory. A woman's sudden death. Must it always be murder with you? The heart can fail, the mind can falter. Poirot turned on him with sudden energy. No, monsieur, the heart does not falter at the precise moment a telegram is begun. Ink does not spread itself across the page by coincidence. And the glass, the mark that betrays another hand. These are not accidents, they are intention. The financier faltered, his denial collapsing into mutterings. Poirot's gaze passed over him and settled upon Lord Penrith. And you, milord, you dismiss too quickly. You seek to close the matter, to bury it in silence. Tell me, why are you so eager that Helena's voice remain unheard? Penrith's face hardened. She was my cousin. I wish her dignity preserved, nothing more. Poirot's smile was faint, almost pitying. Dignity or reputation? The two are not the same, and Lady Helena, she was a woman who understood the difference all too well. The colonel broke in, his mustaches bristling with indignation. This is a circus. We are paraded like criminals while you deliver riddles. If you have proof, show it. If not, stop this charade. Poirot did not flinch. He stepped closer, his small frame now commanding the whole room. Proof? Mais oui, Colonel, it is coming. Already the threads tighten. But you make a slip. You speak of charade, of circus. Why so defensive, when all I've done is ask for truth of your movements? Arbuthnot blustered, but no words came. The silence that followed was damning. Poirot allowed it to stretch, then turned back toward the escritoire. He studied the blotter once more, his finger tracing the faint impression. She wrote quickly, urgently, and then she looked up. Someone passed behind her. That moment, mes amis, was the key. Who was it? Mademoiselle Vale has told us. It was the prince. The prince's composure remained, but his smile had grown thin. I passed, yes. That proves nothing. Nothing, Poirot repeated softly. It proves opportunity. Lady Helena looked up, startled. She hesitated. She did not write the word that should have followed. Instead, an ink blot, a smudge, and then collapse. The coincidence. It is too perfect. The prince's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Poirot continued, his voice calm, yet relentless. 2 glasses near the desk, one marked with a color not her own. A poison present in her cabinet, placed where it might be used, a secret too dangerous to write. And all of you, each with motive enough. But the act, it required boldness, precision, timing. Not all possess such qualities. He smoothed his mustache, letting the words hang. The fire crackled, the fog pressed heavier, and every guest seemed to shrink beneath the weight of suspicion. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he looked around the circle. We are close, mes amis, very close. The net draws in. Soon the murderer will reveal himself or herself, not by confession, but by the slip of the tongue, the crack in the mask. And I, Hercule Poirot, I shall be waiting. The constable shifted nervously, as though wishing to escape the suffocating tension. Dr. Rowan polished his spectacles, his hands not quite steady. Jarvis stood motionless, a sentinel of discretion. And the suspects, each in turn, avoided one another's gaze, for to meet the eyes of another was to risk recognition, complicity, betrayal. Poirot drew a slow breath and stepped back from the escritoire, his voice now softer but edged with iron. Lady Helena sought to tell her truth. She was silenced. But tonight, before the clock strikes another hour, I promise you that truth shall speak. The fog outside thickened until the lamps of Mayfair vanished altogether, leaving the house and island adrift in a sea of darkness. Within, the guests sat taut as bowstrings, their expressions a mixture of resentment, fear, and curiosity. Poirot, standing near the escritoire, let his silence govern them, for silence, when carefully used, compels truth more effectively than accusation. At last he stirred, brushing a speck of lint from his sleeve. We approach now the point where shadows thin, mes amis. But before the mask is torn away, there is yet one detail that demands attention. Lady Helena's telegram, unfinished, yes, but its very incompleteness tells us something. A woman so exact, so deliberate, she does not blot her words without cause. None, it was not clumsiness, it was interruption. Who created that interruption? He pivoted, suddenly fixing his gaze upon the butler. Jarvis, you were first upon the scene after James raised the cry, were you not? Jarvis inclined his head gravely. Yes, monsieur. I assisted in clearing the glass and saw to Lady Helena's sister at once. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And in those moments, did you observe whether the telegram was moved, or whether the pen had been lifted from her hand? The butler paused, his composure momentarily disturbed. The pen lay on the blotter, monsieur, half across the words. I did not move it. I cannot say if any other did before me. Poirot made a soft sound, half satisfaction, half thought. So, the pen across the words, the ink blot spreading. It is the gesture of interruption. Someone leaned close enough to startle her, perhaps to exchange the glass, perhaps even to whisper a threat, and in that instant the message was lost. Lord Penrith shifted impatiently. We cannot sit here parsing blots of ink while the night grows long. If you have an accusation, Poirot, make it plain. Poirot turned to him with a serene smile. Patience, milord. The truth is like the flower. It opens only when its hour has come. But the petals, they are already loosening. His eyes flickered to the colonel. You who claimed the conservatory, though it was locked, why invent such a detail? Because your true position placed you nearer the desk than you admit, perhaps within reach of the tray when glasses were exchanged. The colonel's face reddened, but he barked, Nonsense! I misremembered, that is all. Poirot's mustache quivered with amusement. A soldier does not misremember his post. That, Colonel, is the weakness of your tale, and yet, was it you who silenced her? Or another, more subtle still? Inez Vale rose suddenly, her voice sharp. This is cruel. You accuse everyone in turn, yet never strike. What are we to believe? That any one of us might have done it? That we sit here waiting to be condemned on a whim? Poirot bowed slightly. It is not whim, mademoiselle. It is method. The guilty, they reveal themselves not when accused, but when pressed by the logic they cannot escape. The actress's hands shook as she smoothed her stole. Then press your logic elsewhere. I'm tired of being watched as if every breath I take were a confession. Poirot's eyes softened, though his tone remained precise. Mademoiselle, you betray yourself by impatience. Innocence has nothing to fear from patience. But guilt, guilt seeks to flee before the hour. The prince interjected smoothly, his accent curling through the tension. If you mean to accuse her, monsieur, then do so. Otherwise, spare us these theatrics. Poirot turned on him with sudden sharpness. Theatrics. It is you, monseigneur, who passed behind Lady Helena as she wrote. You who placed your case here, though it belonged upstairs. You who smiled as though all were performance. But murder, it is not theatre, it is calculation. For the first time, the prince's composure cracked, a faint narrowing of the eyes, a quick intake of breath. Poirot noted it instantly. Voila. The mask shifts, but let us not be hasty. There is still the question of motive. Each of you had cause. Colonel Arbuthnot, your fund in jeopardy. Mr. Kestrel, your scheme exposed. Lord Penrith, your reputation threatened. Mademoiselle Vale, your career compromised, and you, monseigneur, perhaps matters of diplomacy, letters that Lady Helena possessed, letters that could ruin. A murmur of shock ran through the room. The prince gave a cold smile. You presume much? Poirot's voice softened, but its precision cut sharper than steel. I presume nothing. I observe. Lady Helena's influence was wide. Her knowledge, dangerous. She wrote that the secret must be told in person. Whose secret? That, mes amis, is the knot we are untying even now. He paused, letting the words sink. The fire spat sparks. The clock ticked mercilessly on. Poirot drew a slow breath and declared, I have nearly all I need. One more detail only, and the pattern is complete. Soon I shall ask you each a question, not of where you were, but of what you feared, and when I hear the answer that falters, I shall know. The guests shifted uneasily, their eyes darting, their composure fraying. Poirot stood calm, a small figure of relentless order amid their storm of doubts. Outside, the fog pressed tighter still, as though the world itself leaned closer to witness the moment when concealment would at last collapse beneath the weight of truth. The fire had burned low, its embers glowing with a dull red light that threw the figures in the drawing-room into half-shadow, making every face appear at once familiar and strange. Poirot moved a few paces forward, his polished shoes clicking faintly against the parquet, and folded his hands behind his back. His voice, though soft, carried with it the sharpness of inevitability. We have spoken of movements, of glasses. of the little trifles that seem at first so unimportant. But now, mes amis, we must speak of fear, for fear is the truest mirror of the soul. Tell me not where you were, but what you dreaded most that Lady Helena might reveal. The challenge hung in the air like a trap sprung. Lord Penrith was the first to bridle. This is grotesque, to demand that we parade our private anxieties. He stopped suddenly, realizing his protest was already a revelation. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Precisely so, my lord. You fear exposure more than injustice. You would rather silence than truth. Lady Helena, she understood this about you, and yet, though you may prefer concealment, concealment is the very tool of murder. The colonel barked. Enough of this Frenchified psychology. What I feared was that she would embarrass the regiment with her endless meddling. She threatened to write the War Office, to call our memorial fund a sham. That was her way, to wound with words, but to suggest I would silence her permanently. Preposterous. Poirot tilted his head. Preposterous, perhaps. But you admit the fear. That is progress. And the rest of you, Mademoiselle Vale. The actress drew a sharp breath, her eyes flashing. She promised an introduction to Sir Michael Hatherley. She withdrew it when I failed to flatter her properly. Do you know what that cost me? A role at Drury Lane. Yes, I feared her pen, but I did not kill her for it. I'm guilty of vanity, not of murder. Vanity, too, can kill, Poirot murmured, but he moved on. His gaze fell upon Adrian Kestrel, who shrank beneath it. Monsieur, we have danced long enough. What was the true state of your scheme? Kestrel's hands trembled as he fumbled with his spectacles. It was fragile. If Lady Helena withdrew, others would follow. I faced ruin. She knew it. She meant to speak to investors in person. She told me so. I begged her to wait, to reconsider. But I did not poison her glass. I swear it. Poirot's mustache twitched upward. You admit ruin, you admit fear, but you deny the deed. Très bien. And now, Monseigneur. The prince straightened, though his smile had become brittle. What should I fear from a meddling Englishwoman? Letters? Correspondence? She was fond of gossip, nothing more. Poirot's eyes sparkled. Ah, but gossip in the hands of Lady Helena, it was not mere chatter, it was weapon. She corresponded with an embassy. She wrote with candor. One letter, perhaps, enough to damage you. Yes, you feared it as surely as the others. The prince inclined his head coolly, but did not deny it. Poirot allowed the silence to deepen, then turned at last to Lydia Marsh. She sat very still, her eyes fixed on the smudged telegram. Mademoiselle, Poirot said gently, what did you fear? Her lips parted, but for a moment no sound emerged. Then, in a low voice, she answered that she would reveal the truth of me, that I was not merely her companion, but her spy. She confided in me because she trusted me, and yet she also tested me, always. I feared that tonight she meant to expose me to everyone. The confession startled the room. Poirot nodded gravely. At last, honesty, you feared exposure. But fear alone does not condemn. No, the guilt lies with one who acted, and here the pattern completes itself. He stepped back, folding his hands with the solemn air of a judge about to pronounce sentence. Consider, mes amis. The poison in the vial, the glass exchanged, the telegram interrupted, the fear upon every face. One among you had both fear and opportunity. One among you passed behind Lady Helena as she wrote. One among you placed a glass, not her own, beside her hand. And one among you had most to lose if she spoke aloud the secret. The guests leaned forward unconsciously, drawn by the force of his certainty. Poirot's voice grew quieter, each word deliberate, inescapable. It was not Lord Penrith, whose anger is too open, not the colonel, whose bluster betrays but does not conceal cunning, not the actress, whose vanity burns too brightly to plot in silence, not even Monsieur Kestrel, who trembles at the thought of ruin, and not Mademoiselle Marsh, whose fear is of shame. not death. No, he turned, his gaze fastening upon the prince. It was you, Monseigneur. You who passed behind her chair. You who smiled when you should have been afraid. You whose case clinks with more than shirts. You who feared the letter that would unmask you before your court and your country. You silenced her, swiftly, neatly, by exchanging the glass. That is why she faltered mid-sentence, why the ink blot spread, why the telegram remained unfinished. A collective gasp broke from the others. The prince rose slowly, his composure fraying at the edges, though he tried to maintain the languid grace that had shielded him until now. This is melodrama, Monsieur Poirot. You have no proof. Poirot's smile was small, certain. Ah, but proof it is in the psychology, in the detail, in the mask you could not hold steady. Lady Helena wrote that the secret must be told in person. She meant to tell it to me. That is why Japp summoned me at once. She had written ahead, you see, days ago. Tonight's telegram was the final warning, but you silenced her before she could finish. Voila, the truth. The silence that followed was thunderous. The prince's face hardened, his charm stripped away, leaving only calculation. Poirot's voice, calm and implacable, cut through the stillness. You may deny, Monseigneur, but denial is the last refuge of the guilty. The pattern is complete. And now, the time for masks is over. The fire sputtered, the clock struck the hour, and in that chime the weight of Poirot's words settled upon them all, sealing the moment when suspicion became certainty and the hidden hand was finally revealed. The prince stood rigid, his hand tightening upon the back of the chair as if the carved wood might lend him strength. His eyes, once languid with amusement, now flashed with cornered calculation. The others stared in horrified silence, the weight of Poirot's words pressing down upon them like the fog outside pressing against the glass. Poirot, serene and immaculate, adjusted the line of his cuffs before speaking again. Monseigneur, you see the game is finished. You have played with confidence, but you forgot one thing. Hercule Poirot observes not only what is said, but what is unsaid. And your silence, your hesitation when I spoke of the embassy letter. Ah, that told me all. The prince's lips curved into a defiant smile, though it lacked conviction. You expect them to believe that a smear of ink and a lipstick mark amount to proof? That my reputation must hang on your theatrics? Poirot's mustache quivered and his voice grew firmer, carrying across the hushed room. No, not theatrics. Precision. Lady Helena wrote of a secret that must be told in person. She confided earlier letters to the embassy, letters that jeopardized you. She placed her trust in me to confirm the truth. That is why I was summoned tonight. You feared that confirmation, and so you moved quickly, seizing the chance when you passed behind her chair. The glass with the darker lipstick, placed beside her hand, contained the digitalis. You counted upon confusion, upon silence, but you miscalculated. For even in her last act, Lady Helena resisted you. She began to write. She left a trace of your crime upon the blotter, and now your mask is broken. Miss Vale gasped, pressing a hand to her lips. Colonel Arbuthnot muttered an oath under his breath. Kestrel sank into a chair, his face chalk white. Lord Penrith turned away, unwilling to be seen gaping. Lydia Marsh, pale but steady, whispered, "She tried to warn us." The constable, uncertain but emboldened by Poirot's conviction, stepped forward. "Monseigneur, I must ask you to remain where you are." The prince gave a harsh laugh. "You think to detain me, here, without proof that would stand in any court?" His words were bold, but the glitter of desperation betrayed him. Poirot inclined his head, his expression almost pitying. "Proof enough, Monseigneur. You see, psychology never lies. Each of them revealed fear, yes, but their fears were petty, survivable. Only you faced ruin not of fortune, but of position, of identity. For you, exposure was death. And so you chose another death instead. It is the logic that is unassailable, the pattern that cannot be broken, and when a man cannot endure truth, he resorts to poison. That, alas, is universal. The silence that followed was unbroken until Jarvis, the butler, spoke softly. Her ladyship suspected as much, monsieur. She told me only yesterday that masks never last. She said, soon someone's face will break. Poirot bowed his head slightly, acknowledging both the butler's words and the inevitability of the moment. The constable, now resolute, called for his men waiting outside. Heavy footsteps sounded in the hall, the door opened, and the prince, his charm utterly stripped away, was taken into custody. His defiance lingered in his eyes, but the poise had fled. The guests exhaled as one, the tension releasing at last. Kestrel buried his face in his hands. The colonel gripped his moustache with trembling fingers. Inez Vale whispered prayers half learned in childhood. Lydia Marsh, silent and grave, looked only at Poirot. Poirot, immaculate still, smoothed his moustache. It is finished. Lady Helena has her justice. And you see, messieurs et mesdames, that the truth, though delayed, cannot be denied. It will out, always. That is the order of things. He turned to the escritoire one last time, gazing down at the smudged telegram. His voice softened. She wrote, must be told in person. And so it has been told. Her final words are fulfilled. Then, with the quiet dignity that was his alone, Poirot reached for his hat and cane. He bowed slightly to the company, who now looked upon him with awe, relief, and perhaps a measure of fear. I bid you good evening. Sleep if you can. For myself, I shall return to my little rooms, where order, blessed order, awaits. And there I shall permit myself a tisane before bed. Justice has been served. Hercule Poirot is satisfied. With that, he departed into the fog, leaving behind a house forever altered, its secrets stripped bare, its silence restored, but never again innocent.